so there's like the tripwire just represents something that you haven't fully smoothed out in your energy. And so then it acts as a tripwire, and then your dream goes and it manifests like, an outcome of it falling apart. And then you said, and then being okay with it just falling apart. And I was like, that's exactly it. That's the thing that smooths out the energy around the tripwire is like, if I trip, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay because it's not the last place.
Right. And it's so funny too, because through this whole process, again, coming back to like this apartment, saying yes to this, it's kind of a townhouse, saying yes to this townhouse has a what's the words I'm looking for here? Saying yes to this townhouse was like a large increase in income that I was going to need to start putting myself into. And so there was like a piece of me, like, I'm getting the ping from source. It's like, yeah, you got to do this, go through the process. Where I'm like, okay, yes, I'm in, like, I trust you. But there was nervousness of it actually happening. Recently, now I'm starting to get nervousness of it not actually happening. And I'm just sitting here like, all right, I get it. Like, all right, I get it. I'll take a step back. I'll remember my, breathing techniques. I'll calm myself down and, I'm going to do the best that I can. But at the end of the day, if this isn't for my highest self, I trust that you're going, kind of like what we talked about on your podcast, where I have that little thing where I'll just be like, yeah, if this isn't for my highest self, I trust that you'll prevent me from doing it. I'll prevent me from having it until I am ready for it to be for my highest self.
Yeah, totally. Which is such a huge level of trust to embody. And so it's so amazing. Do you do any kind of visualization or like, I don't like restricting it to visualizing because I know some people aren't visual, but like, do you do any like preparatory, like feeling it before it happens kind of work?
Yes. So I don't know how much we got into this whenever I was on your podcast. Also, by the way, guys, I was on Amy's podcast. So go check out Clinky Terry on Third Eye Awakening. I forget, what number was it? Do you remember what number it was?
I have no idea what number any of my podcasts are, but it was like 3 weeks ago. So fairly recent.
About I think the God consciousness was in the title or something.
Yeah.
But to get back to it, where was I going with this? Oh, what do I do? A big element, I think, of what I do is in regards to teachings by Paramahansa Yogananda. Like, I literally just ordered another book of his because he's just something about the way he speaks and everything just resonates to my core. What is it that I do? I see that this whole thing that we're engaged is this mutual connection between me and God, right? There's a divine spark. We talked about this part. There's a divine spark in all of us. So my goal as a human is to become as much in tune with that divine spark as possible. So what that means is I'm basically co-creating this entire reality with God. So as I'm coming to decisions, I've noticed that there's leeway in the decisions we can make. So what started this chain reaction within regards to my housing situation was me knowing that I need to get out of my parents' basement, but where am I going to go? And this where God was like, hey, like, that you need to make the next steps, but you're being indecisive. Because for a long time I was like, I either want to go to Austin, Texas, or I'm just going to stay in Pittsburgh. But like, God, whichever one's for me, like, you decide, like, I'll, whatever. And nothing was shifting. And it wasn't until I actually fully decided, like, making a pros and cons list of why Austin, why Pittsburgh, I could see that there was more material reasons in Austin, but there was more deeper spiritual reasons to stay in Pittsburgh. And so, ultimately I picked Pittsburgh. And then once I was like, okay, I'm all in on Pittsburgh, and started listing out what I wanted in a place and all this different stuff, that was whenever kind of the magic started unfolding. So to kind of keep this going, what happened? So whenever I saw this place for the first time, there were so many just like sparks that were getting fired off. First of all, it was far bigger and far more than I need, which was, of course, one of the beautiful blessings that God, I think, gives, or I guess I almost know at this point, one of the blessings that happens. But another thing is as I was kind of walking through it, I could kind of see where everything would go. Okay, podcast studio is going to be here. The jujitsu is going to happen here. Okay, that's where my meditation room is going to be. And so it was almost this, if you want to say going back to our movie analogy, seeing scenes from that movie before they were transpiring, and like, oh my gosh, like I think this makes sense. This is the place. And so we leave the apartment, and the realtor, whatever, leaves before me, and I'm like, oh wait, hey, I just saw that the light's on. And she's like, okay, well, I can get it later, but if you're there, like, do you want to handle it? And I was like, okay, yeah, sure, I got it. And so she gave me the code to the place. I, turn off the light, and then I stand there for a second and try to just connect with the energy of the place. At which point, I kind of meditated / prayed. It's kind of hard to describe.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's a difference, but that's a whole another conversation. And I was basically like, hey, God, like if this is the spot, I'm in. Like kind of give me a sign. And one of my big signs that I usually get is like an electric shock that kind of runs through my body. It'll start at my feet and then very quickly like go up my legs, through my spine, into my head. And something about it always is just like, it's like a yes feeling, or like it's this feeling of like divinity within me, if you will. And so whenever that happened, I was like, okay, like say no more. I'm down. I'm completely in. And it scared the shit out of me. Amy, I was fucking scared. I was like, I have no idea how this is going to unfold, but I'm down for the ride. And so that would have probably been right at the beginning of August. So like the last 20 some days have been crazy in regards to money flowing in from different places, seeing new ways to approach content, just personal energetic frequency, I don't know, vibrations in regards to trust or patience or all those different fun stories we were talking about. So to get back to your question, I think the absolute best thing that you can do is get yourself to a place of calmness. And I don't know if we touched on this in your podcast, but one thing that Paramahansa does talk about is how calmness is a manifestation of God. So when we're feeling calm, we're feeling peace, we're feeling bliss, that's whenever we can communicate with God. If our nervous system's activated, if we're in that sympathetic response, if we're agitated, you're not going to be receiving the divine message of God because you're too attached to something. There's too much energy going on, because the voice of God is a lot more calm. It's a lot smoother. It's a lot more, I think there's a verse. Let me see. There's a verse in the Bible that's along the lines of be still and know that I am God. Psalms 46:10. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Be still and know that I am God. It's literally saying that like stillness is where God lies. Being relaxed, being calm, that is God speaking to you. So if you're able to carry out that feeling, that is your connection to the divine source. I know everyone, especially in our communities, are like, you got angelic beings, you got these, you got spirit guides, you got the light star seeds, which are fine and dandy, and they do exist. My whole thing has recently just been like, well, why don't I just go to the source of it all? Why? Yeah. Like, I think they're good. I think they're fun. I think they're fun to like play with and talk to and all that stuff. But why not just go to the source? And so to kind of just get back to your question, yeah, I get myself as calm as possible. I get really in tune with my nervous system, which has helped a lot with like cold plunges, because that'll activate your nervous system immediately. And so you can now feel it. You're like, oh, this is what it feels like whenever I'm in a fight or flight mode. And so then you learn how to de-stress yourself, become calm, contact God, and then have a peaceful, calm conversation.
Yeah, that's amazing. I knew that cold plunges were good for that, but I've never heard anybody break it down like that, where I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. You would cold plunge, you would let your nervous system be totally activated into like survival, fight or flight, contraction, and then you employ like breathwork techniques or whatever to at will, like, move it into a state of calm. I agree so much. And that's really like a big piece of how I teach people psychic activation is that if our nervous system is activated and contracted, we're not going to be able to pick up. We're not going to be able to connect with God. We're not going to be able to connect with our higher selves, our intuition, like whatever layer of beings like you were talking about, or layer of information we want to connect with. We really, really, really have to learn how to regulate the nervous system.
And I think I heard you talking about this in a podcast, but even, that element of trusting, Like if you're not trusting yourself, that's going to activate your nervous system. You're going to be like, wait,
Yeah.
like, oh shit, like they just told me that I was this and that this happened, and that can't be true. That can't be right. Like that little bit of that little bit of ensure. I love when I just make up phrases on this podcast. I'm starting to vibe with it now, because I at first was like, okay, I need to be proper etiquette speaking, but I think there's something with like, oh, we talked about this on your podcast for sure, with like making up words that like actually make
Yeah.
sense, like speaking out of grammatical punctuality because it makes more sense without it.
Yes.
Oh, where was I going with that though? I forgot my train of thought now. I was excited about that.
You were talking about that doubt, that little bit of doubt that comes in terms of like receiving psychic information.
Yeah, because that doubt will snap you out of it, right? You'll start questioning yourself. It activates the nervous system, and that's what will shut off essentially your guests will shut off. That was the completely wrong word. Will shut off your psychic abilities because you're not in the place of calmness. So, that's how you kind of detach yourself. And then, if you want to bring this back to the real world or actual world, it's like, that's all of this stuff we're talking about, worrying about the fires, worrying about the fluoride that's in our water, worrying about who's going to be the next president, worrying about, things that are completely out of my control. The number one thing that you have in your control is your nervous system. That's 100% it. And it seems to me the more that I just relax that, and I know what my triggers are too, which is cool. Like if my mom's about to say something, or like I can feel the energy before it even happens.
Yes.
Yeah. And so just taking that second to just, okay, let me approach this from a calm place. It changes everything. It changes everything.
It does. I totally know what you mean, because I'm the same with my husband. Like, I love him so much. He'll, it just happens when you're in a long-term relationship, you get on each other's nerves. And so he is the one that keeps me informed, whether I ask about it or not, about the doomsday scenarios of the world. Like, he's my chief advisor that I never hired. So I'll feel him coming into the room with that energy. Like I'll just feel it before it happens. And exactly that exact thing of just like, okay, and I don't need him to be different. I can just allow this to play out and neutralize it. It really does change things, because then that's the main thing, at least for me, is like, then I don't need him to be different or anybody else that triggers me, or some kind of scenario. Like, I don't need that thing to change in order to feel better. I can just feel better, which is extremely liberating in all areas of life.
I think that's what salvation is. Whenever we're talking about becoming one with God, it's completely freeing yourself from that. It manifests in the nervous system, but it's freeing yourself from that energy as a whole.
Yeah. I love that. I love the topics of like redemption and salvation, things like that. I don't talk about them very much because I feel like they're super lofty, but I just love those topics and understanding what salvation really means, because I think at the end of the day, at the end of whatever the proverbial day, all of us as souls, we meet that theme. It might not happen in a particular lifetime. We might be focused on other things, but there's a point where you're tired. It's almost like as a soul, you're tired. You're tired of all the whole trauma drama narrative that we do as humans, and you just seek to be reunited with the divine. And that is the process of salvation. And I think that that description you just offered is so beautiful, where you are one with God, rather than outsourcing your power to all these other things that are happening. And then you become like the eye of the hurricane, where the chaos can be cycling all around you, but you are in your own centeredness, connected directly to God.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to plug his book, Paramahansa. I just got it in the I got to check it out. I'm so glad you're showing it, because I was going to ask you after anyway. Well, there's another one. Oh my gosh, it's so crazy. Like, Amy, listen, I kind of read books. Like, sometimes I'll read like the first like couple pages. I'll be like, okay, I understand what they're saying, where they're going with this. Yeah, it's a good book. Like, you should read it. There's some books I can't really finish. There's some books, but I rarely read more than one book by people. Paramahansa, you should see up. I don't have it right here. In the next studio, I'll have it behind me. But I think I have probably 12 or 13 of his books at this point that are absolutely insane. Some of them are actually keeping my camera up right now. There's so many powerful ones, but definitely start off with Autobiography of a Yogi. But based on like what we're talking about here, the one that I'm reading right now is Inner Peace, How to Be Calmly Active and Actively Calm. It's so phenomenal because he just breaks it down. Oh, here, let me read you actually. I'll read you the chapter titles. All right, chapter 1, Where Can I Find Peace? Chapter 2, Meditation, the Science of Being Actively Calm. Chapter 3, The Spiritual Art of Relaxation, Removing Stress from Body and Mind. Chapter 4, How to Be Calmly Active, Centered in Peace no matter what you are doing. Chapter 5, Peace in Your Daily Life, Essential Principles and Practices. Chapter 6, The Wisdom Perspective That Leads to Inner Peace. I mean, and like, it's hard to put into words, but it makes so much sense. It's being able to, going back to our movie analogy, being able to detach ourselves from that individual frame that we're experiencing right now, and just knowing that there's a bigger picture that's unfolding. Like this one frame is a part of a much bigger picture, and we have no idea how it's going to unravel. So whether or not I get my house or not, whether or not I have to tell people that I'm not actually moving to the Strip District, whether or not I lose all of my podcast equipment, someone comes in and steals it all, it's knowing to learn how to be peaceful in those moments. And especially every time you start getting triggered, it's amazing. Like I'd go to tub clubs on every Wednesday, and I come down, and our parents, I share a car with them. I came down this morning and I was like, hey, like, they're like, oh, like, well, how's your day? I was like, oh, I have a podcast with Amy. I'm going to tub club later. And they're like, oh, we have a problem. Like, we all need the cars tonight. And that was like a trigger for me. Like I like instantly noticed I get triggered. I'm like, nope. I'm just like, okay, well, we'll figure it out. And then, we start talking more about it, and then there's room for it because, like, worst case scenario, I could always get an Uber or something. And so, I'm not going to have to get an Uber, and it all ends up just working itself out where there's like no issue whatsoever. And it's really amazing how, gosh, it's just beautiful. I guess I just want to highlight the book's beautiful about learning how to reclaim the inner peace within your body, within your citadel, such that you don't make detached or unaligned actions with your higher self.
Yeah. Which is isn't that what we all actually want? Like, it's funny because, a lot of the time we think we want to manifest, for example, money. Or like money feels like a big one to me, even though it's not the one I'm the most interested in currently, but it previously was because I was learning how to master it. And but we think we want money, or we think we want a specific relationship, or whatever circumstances. And Abraham Hicks says this, which I take some issue with the things that Abraham Hicks says, but there's a lot of truth there too, I feel. And like she points out that everything you want is because you think you'll feel better for having it. So just feel better now, and then you get to have it. But if you wait till you have it until you feel better, you can't have it because you feel like shit, and it exists where you feel better. But to bring it to the topic of inner peace, and like it makes me so happy when people can like successfully write a book and market it and like bring that message to more of us, because we think we want these things, but the only reason any of us want money is because we want to feel free. We want to feel supported. We want to feel safe in our bodies and our nervous system to be our full authentic selves and to move through the world in accordance to that, like those pings that we receive. We want to feel peace. Like that's all any of us actually want, is to just feel peace. So it's really amazing that somebody has written a book, somebody with a large audience and a large influence has written a book that's just like, here's how this, here's peace.
Yeah.
Learn it, feel it, be in that state. And then you don't have to worry. Like, I think as you were talking about it, I was thinking like that is then what is achieved when, like, when you hear people talking manifestation about the importance of surrender. And most of us, because we have these tight nervous systems and we have these really intense stories going, we're like, surrender means I'm giving up. Like, I'm waving the white flag. It's never going to happen. I'm just accepting my shitty lot in life. But surrender means that you're in such a state of peace and like union with God that you don't feel like you need to micromanage anything anymore. You can just, like, you're just opening up and dilating. You're just dilating and letting it all flow in because your vibration is peace. And so you know that the things that come in will match peace. And that anything that comes in just to be like, whoop, like, let's shake it up a little bit, you will be able to regain peace very quickly and easily because it's like the inner state that has been chosen, you know? And bringing it back to our nervous systems, like, again, I think the nervous system is key to almost everything because a nervous system that is fearful is contracted. And then it is dialed into fearful, contracted things that reinforce. It's like that's all we can see when we have a contracted nervous system. When we cultivate peace and dilation, then we can allow in all those like really beautiful things that just feel almost like, can this even really be true? But we also vibrate at that state of being. And so we have a little bit of surprise, but also like, of course it's like this at the same time, you know, like I'm surprised and like, of course this is how it's going to go.
I think that's joy. I think that's like kind of just like the essence of joy and of like, you know, bliss almost, right? It's that state of just experiencing everything as if it's like new and brand new. And I don't know. It's a very fascinating feeling because it really can take you over in a beautiful way. And I think that's obviously another thing that people can struggle with, which is surrendering because, you know, or letting go because they think that they have to be in control of it. But, you know, and this really shook me. And this is kind of a bizarre thing, but there was like a fly that was in our kitchen. And, you know, I opened up the window, but he wouldn't go out. And so all I did was very peacefully, very calmly moved him out the window and he flew away. And whenever I did that, just like this overwhelming, like I was almost brought to tears with how much joy and how much like, it was the most profound thing in the world. And I'm sure it even sounds weird saying it now that like helping a fly out the window could bring so much joy and just so much serenity, but it did. And that's something, I mean, that just really, really blew me away that much joy could be in helping an insect move on the other side of a piece of glass.
It totally makes sense to me because what I hear when you're saying that is like this deep recognition in that moment, in that scenario, that you were free of the perception that you have to destroy this other life form in order to return to your state of peace. Like your peace is not fragile. It's very deeply intentionally cultivated. And so as you watch this other little life form fly away onto its own trajectory, because you don't, do you know what I mean? Like you don't, again, I think about like my husband is just killing the flies everywhere. Like we've gone through several fly swatters and I think about it, I'm like, and I know, and I've talked to him about it, I'm like, your piece is very fragile. You have a fragile piece. Because there's something deeper that wants to be gone into. And I think that's true of a lot of people. Like, I'm not meaning to throw him under the bus. He's just the person I live with. But, and I know I've been in that state before too, where it's a veneer of peace, but underneath is chaos. And if that veneer is, if there's turbulence, then it feels like, it can feel like suddenly the chaos is predominant and you have cultivated such a deep state of peace that the fly is not a threat. And then that extends to every other form of life. You don't need to destroy or crush anyone or anything else in order to be at peace. You can let it go.
Here's throw in this nice little duality here. I don't know if you guys have them in Canada yet, but the lanternflies, are you familiar with those?
No.
So it's prevalent right now in Pittsburgh and probably most of northeastern United States. They're these little flies that I think only live for about a year, but they grow to be probably, probably the size of a $50, and they are invasive. So I think they came over from, our other favorite C word, China, and they've been just their saliva will like get on trees and it'll like kill the trees, and they reproduce like crazy, and they're very destructive. And this was a huge piece of me that was a little bit difficult for a while for me to integrate, which was in regards to killing them, because I'm like, I was kind of in this middle of like, kind of Jainism and Sikhism and Buddhism and Hinduism, where it's like, okay, where does destruction come into this? Like, this is killing, like that's not okay. And, kind of the message I found is that, this is a species that's not in their, a couple things was unraveling here. Number one, is that it's a species that's not in their appropriate environment. And so it will cause more harm than good. And so, it's almost dutiful in order to kill them. The next thing that comes in is like, okay, are you killing them with malicious intent, or are you killing them in regards to serving a higher power in terms of, serving the greater good? And, this came into a big issue as well with me, because, and I briefly talked about this at the end of one of my podcasts. Actually, I don't know if it's out there or not, but I know that there's a strong opinion that humans are a plague on the earth and we should be wiped out. I mean, it's probably not strong, but it exists. And so, I'm kind of sitting there in this conundrum of like, I know we're not a plague. I know we're capable of beautiful things. So like, why are we not supposed to be wiped out, but I'm supposed to wipe out this bug? Because again, this was in regards to killing this bug, it came from a place of calmness where I'm like, am I supposed to do this? It's like, yes. And I'm like, shit, like, it created that tension in my body, that tension of this is something you're supposed to do in order to, I don't want to say conquer your fear. Maybe it is conquering a fear of doing harm, conquering that fear. But it's like, so sorry to go down that rabbit hole, but coming back to this idea of humans, how is it then that humans are not a plague on this earth, but these insects in particular is something that I should be trying to help eradicate? And the way that it was kind of came to me is like, well, Earth was made for humans. Humans are supposed to be here. This insect was not made for this geographical location. So it is not supposed to be here. It changes. I was shown that it changes perspectives if you go to China and then start killing them. It's like, now you're doing wrong. You're now malicious intent with your killing. However, with, in terms of killing this insect in Pittsburgh or the Northeast or anywhere that it might be invasive, it's teaching you a different lesson. It's teaching you that lesson of, are you able to carry out, killing something that's invasive, that shouldn't be where it's supposed to be, but can you do that with peace? Can you do that with calmness? Can you do that with bliss? And wow, I just got this perspective. If we zoom out and look at the C word we were talking about, think about how many people lost their lives, or their lives were changed, or they came into harm from our physical perception. But if we take a step back from the perception of God, it's to make space for this new energetic upgrade. And I mean, holy shit, like think about how much that has to, or had to have pained her, like, what I mean? Like, I think I'm getting at a point where I may be just out of my perception of reality, but just that conundrum exists where there might be times where you see, that doesn't feel right to say. I'm going to hold back from saying that. Maybe this is a good spot to open it up to you if you have anything to add to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're talking about is a perfect example of why it doesn't work to speak about things like this in terms of absolutes or like absolute rules, because there's so much subtlety and nuance. Because I think you're totally right. It depends on the true state from which, if you're killing these bugs, the state from which you're doing it versus like the description I offered of the fly. And maybe that's not true. Like that's just what I thought when you were, sharing the story of the fly. But if somebody was killing the fly because they perceived the fly as an annoyance and a threat and like, whatever, that is basically like, essentially it's a vibration of feeling disempowered to the external circumstances. If you're killing something from a space of connecting with, like higher self or God consciousness, and that's the message that you receive, you can do it with beautiful love. Like again, like I know how cheesy this sounds in words, but I remember hearing a podcast interview a gajillion years ago. I don't remember what it was, but the woman who hosted it was speaking for a segment with a man who did the slaughtering for a halal food producer. And he said that his job was so sacred because he would pray over the animal, be with the animal, like divinely connect with the animal and thank it for its life and then take its life. And the words he used specifically to describe it really moved me such that I remember that conversation like 10 years later, because I thought death isn't the enemy. So the taking of something's life is not, or the ending of some being's life is not the thing that we should all avoid. And as we put our efforts into avoiding the inevitability of death, I think we create a lot of problems. So the end of one life form, I guess it kind of goes back to what I was saying maybe half an hour ago or maybe longer, I can't remember, but where I was talking about when you learn to access either past lives or the Akashic records or whatever, and you start to see yourself as a soul and you encounter your other past lives and you realize like, wow, even though I might have died a horrible death, I didn't end. That was not the end of me. It was the end of that incarnation and that set of timeline probabilities and possibilities. And yet I go on. And so death isn't really the thing that we need to avoid. It's more like the subtlety of what we are projecting onto the thing that we are experiencing through that death process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's more about the energetic imprint of what you're doing or what's occurring. Because even if as you're talking about the guy who was carrying out those, the slaughterhouse, I very much take a similar approach still, even with these lantern flies, which arguably are less energetically conscious is the wrong word, less energetically aware than an animal would be. And I still take that same process of like getting to a place of calmness, asking like, all right, like making sure I'm banishing all darkness. I'm literally like, because I know I've heard multiple times, it's like you can say, okay, if you're of darkness, don't talk to me, only things of light. And that's like a fundamental rule in the universe where only beings of light, God specifically in my case, is able to talk to you. And so even before I go and kill one, I'll take a second at least and just be like, hey, are we still doing this? Am I still supposed to kill this thing? And so far it's always been a yes. And so I'm on board with that sacred process of, don't carry, it's like the energy that you carry things out with as opposed to the action itself. And that's a huge piece of the karmic imprint that gets left on you or gets left on the world because of the actions that you're taking.
Totally. Yeah. I really, really believe that is true. And again, like it's a dicey topic, because then somebody might listen and extrapolate and assume that maybe we mean something like, oh, whatever the means justify the end, or the end justifies the means, and, the greater good, and all those kind of philosophies can be absolutely warped and taken in the wrong direction. It really is about the state of, that we are, the state we're embodying when we do something. Even more so, I think, than the intention behind it. It's like the state. Like, am I doing this in a state of love and freedom and peace? And I don't know. I'm like just reaching for words, but not really feeling them at the moment, versus a state of thinking that I am, I don't know, like here
holier than thou,
here to control things, I guess. You know what I mean? Like, for example, so I used to be a midwife. So I used to work in the medical field, and in Ontario, Canada, where I live, midwives are primary care providers. So that means we are the same as being a doctor, but we only specialize in like a healthy, normal pregnancy. If it becomes high risk, then we transfer care or share care with a specialist obstetrician. But my point is, like, it's not, I know in certain states, it's like this, like, sort of like hippie unregulated thing. In Canada, it's very regulated, very, very integrated in the medical system. And the majority, well, everything that we do in that industry is to prolong life. It's to guarantee life and save life. And as somebody who lost the life of her son, I say that I see the destructive effects of that philosophy. It's because it's coming from fear. So we aren't prolonging life out of a state of benevolence. In fact, we are villainizing death from a state of fear. And it is causing very negative effects. And people don't really usually want to talk about that because, nobody wants to make room for the reality of, mothers and babies dying.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off here, but it felt like there was a small shift there, and maybe it's just because I've been listening to other podcasts you've been on. But are we starting to touch into transhumanism? Is that what you're talking about here?
I mean, it does absolutely lead into transhumanism. That wasn't what I was meaning, but it does lead into that. It's the same kind of philosophy, the idea, and you can see it at end of life care as well, or the way that we the objective is always for somebody to live. Like, we've determined that the prolonging of life is victory and death is defeat. And that is not that's not true. That's coming from our ego fear.
So it's like a quantity over quality perspective.
Yeah. And so specifically in like mother and baby care, if one takes action that we rationalize as like, this is necessary in order to save the life of, it's usually the baby, but sometimes it's the mom. But the action is coming from a state of fear. I have seen and witnessed and sadly participated in events from that scenario that I can see the damage that it's causing damage to the mother, to the father, to the baby. And nobody wants to talk about that damage because all we want to do is pat ourselves on the back and be like, oh my God, oh, thank God we were there. The baby lived. And then we're just like, sink or swim, like, have fun with that trauma that no one's ever going to acknowledge, and you're going to get gaslit about forever, and you're going to feel postpartum depression and not know why, and everybody's going to be like, but at least you have a healthy baby. It's very, very destructive. Whereas, and I think that this is like for people who work in hospice care, end of life care, who like hold space for the natural death process, they understand that sometimes the thing that is the most loving is to accept an inevitable outcome and bring the most amount of reverence to it as possible, or at least hold space for death being something that we don't have to avoid and be afraid of forever, as if any of us can bypass it.
Are you able, because I think you lost me a little bit whenever you started talking about like the babies, are you able to provide an abstract example of what you're referring to?
Yeah, sure. So if there's the perception that a birth is going to be like a risky kind of birth, so let me think. So if there is, let's say a woman has a history of giving birth to large babies, so 10 pounds and up, that's pretty big for a newborn baby, but women do it. I've seen them do it naturally. So it's definitely possible, but in hospitals, it's perceived that that is dangerous. And there, of course, are risks associated with it. And I'm not trying to deny that. But what happens in the hospital typically, but it can also happen at home births with midwives as well, is that the doctors, the nurses, like all the medical staff, they go into it thinking this bad outcome, this like high risk outcome that could cause, a trauma to the baby or a death to the baby or something like that is of greater likelihood here. So we're going to mentally prepare for it. And as we mentally prepare for it, we are unknowingly going to stack the chips in that direction so that and we are going to take physical action. Like, I'm not just talking about manifesting it. I'm talking about taking physical action that increases the likelihood that a traumatic outcome is going to occur. And then we're going to participate in what would have probably been unnecessary resuscitation of a baby, causing trauma to the baby, separating the mom and the baby, causing trauma to the mom and the dad. And then we're going to put the baby in the special care nursery for a period of observation because that's the protocol following a resuscitation and prolonging the separation of mom and baby. And we're never going to talk about the amount of damage that we caused. Instead, we're going to self-congratulate because we saved the day. But actually, we caused the whole fucking thing, most likely. Like, there's a situation. Specifically what I'm referring to, there's a situation called shoulder dystocia. So it can happen with any size of baby, but it tends to happen more commonly with big babies. But basically it's where so if you think of a baby coming out of the mom's birth canal, one of the babies come out sideways. So there's a bottom shoulder that comes out like closer to her bum, and there's a top shoulder that comes out closer to her pubic bone. Sometimes that top shoulder won't be like rolled in enough and it'll get hooked on the pubic bone. So the head is born, but as you try to guide the baby out, it's getting hooked on and we learn that there's only so many minutes that this situation can go on for before brain damage starts to occur. And it fills you with so much panic that you're the one, as the midwife or the doctor or the nurses, you're on the hook for the outcome of this baby's life. So I'm not trying to disparage the character or the intentions of any medical staff who go through these situations. Also, they experience trauma all the time and then go to work the next day without any opportunity to digest and integrate that trauma. So if you think that there's a big baby coming and you think there's a chance that there's going to be a shoulder dystocia, I've seen it happen so many times where then the doctor changes their approach and they, rather than just letting the baby be born, they kind of start pulling on the baby, which then interrupts the natural process that wants to happen, potentially creates a shoulder dystocia, or maybe it was just a big fucking baby and it was going to take an extra minute to come out. And then automatically we assume, oh my God, it was a shoulder dystocia. If the baby doesn't start crying within 15 seconds, we have to clamp and cut the cord and take the baby over to the warmer and start resuscitating it to get it to breathe right away.
Wow.
And yeah, those situations all cause a lot of collateral damage, and we just don't ever discuss it. So prolonging life from a place of fear, the whole reason I started talking about it, the prolonging life from a place of fear can be more destructive than facilitating death from a place of acceptance and love. It's not really about life or death. It's about the state within which we meet it.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I think you probably even see that in regards to many things, but even just trying to live an extra day or just trying to do things that are going to live an extra day. And and this is kind of where I see it as just a quality versus quantity thing. It's like, would you rather live one day of the greatest day of your entire life or 100 years of just misery and pain and torture? It's like, sign me up for the one day. Like if that's if those are the two options, why would I try to have the worst possible thing? But, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch of different elements that come into this, hospital situation that it's easier for me to say than it does for, yeah. Do you feel like there's things that could be done within the hospital space that would correct this, or at least get us a little bit closer to something that might be a little bit more calming as opposed to destructive?
I honestly don't think so, because it's so ingrained in the system, because basically what everybody ultimately fears, I mean, of course they do genuinely fear the death of a baby or the death of a mother or some kind of, outcome that is going to cause just devastating grief to a family. But what they ultimately are acting out of is the fear of litigation, because that's how the system is set up. And so every single action you're taking is about covering your butt. Everything you're doing, it's impossible not to. And that was a rude awakening for me when I went into midwifery, because I went in all like naive and thinking like, oh my God, I'm going to help people have like the best birth possible. And there were so many times that I had to watch my hands doing something that I knew was not in the highest support of the highest health of everybody. For example, preparing a medication that I knew was not going to make things better for anyone, but that the protocol required me to do it. And if I didn't do that, and there was any kind of bad outcome, like it all would have fallen on me. Like everybody is looking with a fine tooth comb through the history of what happened to find the person to point the finger at. So that's the whole entire culture of it. And it applies to everybody. And I just don't think that there are any changes that can be made unless that is completely eradicated. I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Yeah, it sounds to me almost as if we need to find a way to divorce the money from the healthcare institution, but at the same point, it seems very difficult given the natural state of the world in regards to healthcare. Like,
and
go ahead.
And the perception of that, like the perception that a doctor, it most often manifests with a doctor, but like that the doctor somehow has godlike powers to help you avoid death. Do you know what I mean? Like it's about money, but I think a lot of the times when people sue, it's because they're in so much pain and they think that somebody should have done something different. But everybody's just a human. Like in that sense, we're not God, we have a connection to God, but we aren't the ones as our individual ego selves. We aren't the deciders of who lives and dies. And when we try to do that kind of thing, it doesn't usually go very well. So, I think that's a big part of it too. Is sort of like we are trained to believe that all babies should live and all mothers should live. And if that's not the case, it's because somebody did something wrong.
So in regards to this idea of that we don't have say or control over, at least let's say our life, like when we die, when we live, whenever you've worked with the Akashic records, what level of control do we have in planning, let's say, our life in regards to how long we live or what we're going to experience or who we're being born to? Do we have control over that or none at all?
Yeah, so I found something super interesting. It seems to me that there are two different types of incarnations or types of souls. So the first one is the one that we're typically more familiar with, and I call them loopers. And it involves the karmic wheel that a lot of us have heard about. I'm just trying to think about how to approach it, because there's all these like understanding that I have that I don't know if everybody would understand it. But so what it looks like to me is that the way that this place is supposed to work is that we would totally plan out our incarnation, like every aspect of it. And then we would come in and have the incarnation. And then when we die, we completely leave this realm, this game. And we, I don't know, chill out till we're ready to incarnate again, wherever, as whomever, and we decide all that again. So we would have free passage and free will to decide all of it and then live it out from the human perspective here. But what I see happens is that I call it oh my gosh, I haven't used this term in a while, I'm realizing, so I'm kind of forgetting what it was. Oh yeah, it's like a frequency net. There's a frequency net over top of Earth, so to speak, that prevents souls from actually leaving and holds us at a lower frequency of consciousness so that we don't do this ascending stuff and remembering that we are the lucid dreamer within the dream, and we don't ever self-actualize to that degree of power and co-create with God in the way that we are designed to do. And so we live these lives, and they are they're very traumatic. They're very painful. There's a lot of pain. There's like physical body pain. There's relationship pain. There's personal ego pain. There's heartbreak. There's all the layers of pain that coincide with all of our chakras, a lot of trauma and a lot of false programming. And if we're at a certain level of unconsciousness, then when we die, if we are deeply identified with those stories, it creates a density to our our soul consciousness, I guess, where we can't pass through that frequency net. And whatever leftover charge, emotional charge, and sort of like theme or pattern was like remained at the point when we die, it's still alive in us. So then we just, we kind of leave an incarnation. And I do believe that we go to like a peaceful place within the fourth dimension, like within the astral, like there are layers of the astral as well, but we never actually get out of the astral, and we just loop back into another incarnation that, rather than picking the features and designing an incarnation intentionally that would serve us, it's like we loop back into an incarnation that is set up to have a similar emotional charge and similar themes. And that's kind of the karmic wheel. And we have to hopefully we eventually figure it out so that we can approach those traumatic situations with more consciousness and liberate ourselves from it's kind of like being in a hell loop, basically. And I perceive that most of the people who are incarnated are loopers. So that's the experience they're having. Then I see another group of souls, and I think this is what is often referred to as star seeds, but I don't know that it necessarily has to be souls that come from a different planet or whatever. But it appears to me that somehow we're outside of this construct. And so we're not stuck within that frequency net. And we choose to come in to try and raise the frequency of consciousness here. And I call those souls drip downs, because it's like they have an outie and then they choose a portion of their energy to come in as an innie. And usually they orchestrate multiple incarnations for themselves at a time. And so it's almost more like parallel lives than past lives. Like they're living these different incarnations all at the same time with the same soul consciousness, but it will happen at different points in the human historical timeline.
Whoa. How do you know if you're living parallel lives at this time?
I guess I would say that the hallmark thing for me is like when I think about loopers, most of the people who come for Akashic readings with me are not loopers. They are drip downs, but sometimes they can be loopers, and one is not better than the other at all. It's more like some of us kind of got, it really does feel like some of us got trapped here and some of us came from outside to spring the trap. But loopers are usually really, they feel fragmented. Like they feel like they can't remember a lot of themselves. They don't have a lot of memory. And the reason I hesitate is because I'm like, I also don't want to make anybody think that if they can't remember their past lives, that must mean that they're loopers or something like that and that they're trapped here. Like, I don't want to instill fear. This is just my English language way of trying to explain patterns that I see. But like loopers, almost like there's so much energy behind the patterns that they're playing out. Those patterns are very hard to break. They can be broken for sure. But like I think about, our parents or our grandparents who are still doing the same thing that they've been doing for 20 years, watching The Price is Right, playing bingo, chain smoking, like that kind of thing. And they're like complaining about the same pattern that has been happening forever, as if they don't have any control over it. And the reason they don't isn't because their soul is immature. It's because they have been fragmented through so many lifetimes of trauma that they are disconnected from the wholeness of their consciousness. So it's harder for them to remember the continuity of themselves and their multiple lifetimes and how powerful they are. They just feel very identified with who they are in this life and the pattern that they're living out. Whereas the drip downs, a lot of the time they do carry a lot of galactic energy or starseed energy. Like there is just something about them that feels like not entirely from this earth, or they're carrying, I don't know, like I use all those terms with a big grain of salt, but like they're carrying information or experience or memory from, I'll call it elsewhere, a different video game. And they have more of a knack to have spontaneous recall or like achieve states of transcendence, even if it's in bite-sized chunks, kind of like you were describing with your process of reading this book and cultivating your peace. Like that is an indication of a drip down soul. Like there is a part of you that's outside of here. So your buy-in to the illusion of this place is less intense than it is for a looper. But it's not because you are better. You're anchored in more of a frequency of absolute truth, and the loopers got stuck here, so they're anchored in more of like the illusion.
And this is the end of part 2. In part 3, Amy and I finish up this whole idea on reincarnation and the different perspectives we have. We even jump into NPCs, which are non-playing characters. I don't think I've shared my opinions on those before, but we jump into that there. We dive deeper into karma and how we can really get salvation from it. We even dive into religion and the trauma that's created. So guys, stick around, because I know if you've been enjoying part 1 and part 2, you will always enjoy part 3, because in my opinion, that's always the best part. I don't know why, but the way these podcasts play out just seems like part 3 is the best. But enough from me. So with all that being said, I look forward to seeing you guys in Odyssey number 89, part 3, unraveling the tangles of the cosmic puzzle and spiritual truth.